What's going on, guys? Welcome back into the channel. In today's video, we're going to be going over our updated sliders and settings for Madden 22 realistic gameplay. Now, to start off with, because I got a lot of questions of this in the last video, we are on all Madden and simulation gameplay style. The quarter length and Excel clock are set to 9 minutes with Excel clock at 14 seconds. This is giving us the best scores possible at the end of the game. Now, there is a little bit of a balance to be had here in terms of actual snap counts and things like that in opposition to having appropriate scores. I find that if I have this set to 10 minutes, I end up with scores that are a little bit too high, like games always going into the high 30s and 40 points, whereas if we take off that extra minute per quarter and take the Excel clock down to 14, I end up with more realistic scores at the end of the game. One of the other things to note here with realistic gameplay is that when you set your quarter length down to 9 minutes or set it a little bit lower, you end up with a CPU that game plans a little bit more effectively. So when you start to get into the later portions of the game, I'm sure you guys have noticed that sometimes it's like the CPU forgets what they're doing and they tend to not really have a game plan established for that portion of the game. It's a little bit odd the way that it works, but if you cut down that amount of time at the end of the game where they don't really know what they're doing, and it gives you kind of the advantage to just kind of come back and take a lead, or take an explosive lead or something like that. If you cut off a little bit of that time, I find that the game plays a little bit more realistic. So that's another note for the 9 minutes 14-second Excel clock. Next, we're going to go through my auto subs. So I currently have my auto subs for every position set as follows. So the base is 80-60, which you'll see for quarterbacks, but at halfback, I have it turned up to 85-80. That gets my halfbacks rotating in on a little bit more of a regular basis. Wide receivers, 85-70. Now, I just don't have depth wide receivers that I want to rotate into the game, so you can turn this up if you want your receivers to rotate in more. Fullbacks and tight ends, 85-80. Again, that's kind of the benchmark for where you want it to be if you want your players to sub in a little bit more regularly. O-line, 80-70. Again, not a very good O-line for the Steelers, so I don't want players rotating in. On defense, D-tackle, 85-80. D-ends, 85-75. Linebackers, 85-80. Cornerbacks, 80-70, and safeties, 80-65. So just that one last note, like I said, if you have a position that you truly want players rotating in and out, 85-80 is kind of my benchmark at the current point in time in order to make your players sub in on a little bit more of a regular basis. It works really well for me. I'm liking it, so that's what I'm sticking with as we speak. Now, the part of the video that everybody cares about. So there are a couple of minor and major changes from my first slider set to this one, and we'll note those as we go through. However, to start off with, quarterback accuracy stays the same at 32. Pass blocking again at 15. Wide receiver catching is at about a 50. I'm considering taking this down to a 49 to make my life a little bit more difficult, to have a couple more dropped balls on my receivers' ends, so I think I might do that. Run blocking down to 40. Fumbles are set at 70, and then this is where the minor changes start to come in. So pass defense reaction time and pass coverage are both now set to 58. I found that for the user end of things, it was maybe a little bit too good of coverage, especially against the CPU. So to make my life a little bit more difficult, I set these to 58. One thing to note, though, is if you are in user versus user leagues and you want it to be ultra competitive, I would consider keeping this up around a 65, 67 range. That's going to give you pretty realistic gameplay in user versus user leagues. Next up is the interception slider set to 15, tackling set to 54. That's going to do it for the user skill. Let's go ahead and move down to CPU skill. So moving down here to CPU skill, I turned the quarterback accuracy back up to 50. Now this is a major change because we had it way down at 10. I got some recommendations to move it back up into the 30s, and honestly, I think a lot of people are right on this. If you turn it down into, anything below 50, honestly, the CPU just doesn't want to move the ball down the field. They don't want to push the ball down the field on medium to long passes, and that's a massive issue. That's not exactly how it worked in Madden 21. We didn't see that same issue, but we are definitely seeing that issue with the CPU quarterback accuracy slider this year. So setting it to 50 it's going to have them be probably more accurate than they should. However, with the increased pass coverage in comparison to base, you're going to see your players break up passes more often. And so I end up with actually pretty realistic pass completion percentages for the CPU quarterbacks because my defenders intercept balls, make plays on the ball, and things like that. Now, this is the Pittsburgh Steelers secondary. They don't have corners that are very good, but they will come up and break up passes from time to time, and will end up with a little bit more of a accurate quarterback accuracy rating. And so this is what we're going with at quarterback accuracy for the CPU. Next up, the CPU's pass blocking is set to 35, wide receiver catching at 50, run blocking at 70, fumbles at 63, and then their pass defense reaction time as well as pass coverage are set to 67. Their interception rating is set to 20, and then another minor change comes in here where tackling goes up to 45. So I noticed that it was a little bit too easy to break tackles against the CPU on the setting that we had it on, so I took it down to a 45, and I'm getting a really good balance of being able to break some tackles, not breaking all the tackles, and not always being able to gain extra yardage because the CPU can't tackle. So 45 has been really consistent for me, and I'm liking the way the tackling works for the CPU set on 45. For special teams, field goal power is set to 50, field goal accuracy at 45, and a minor change here, punt power up to 55. I've just noticed that on average, punt distances are a little bit too short, so we put this up to 55. Punt accuracy stays at 40, and kickoff power stays at 50. Next up is injury rating at 22. This has been really consistent and really good for me in terms of the amount of injuries that I'm getting and the length of those injuries. I'm liking it a lot. The other change here is going to be fatigue, which we changed to 72. This is giving me some pretty realistic rotation with my players, and it's been pretty consistent for me for the most part. And then the final change here in the game options section is the minimum player speed threshold, which I did take up to 53 to close the gap a little bit between the super fast burner players and everybody else. As we all know, there's a ton of burner wide receivers. There are a lot of corners in the NFL that are elite that can cover those guys, and whenever you have the minimum player speed threshold set to base or below, those speed guys just get open no matter what. And so we're closing that distance a little bit by setting this to 53. I'm probably even going to consider taking this higher because I'm still seeing burner receivers getting open at too high of a rate, but we're playing at 53 for right now. And then the final section of this video, the penalty section. Offsides is set to 85, false start set to 80, holding 65, face mask 50, defensive pass interference 75, and then everything after that is set to base. So all these penalties are set to on, illegal block in the back, and roughing the passer are set to a base of 50. And again, I want to note real quickly here that roughing the passer has been very good this year. That's one of the things that they have definitely gotten right, in my opinion, with the gameplay in Madden 22. There is a very well-timed roughing the passer call that is in the game. If you hit them slightly too late, you're going to get that roughing the passer call, but we're also not seeing roughing the passer on every single play. So that is one slider that I like. And with all that being said, that is our updated sliders video here for September 21st update here. So, we are approaching the end of September. The scouting update will potentially be coming out. We'll see if they patch anything and change the way the game plays that might modify these sliders. But for right now, that's what I'm playing on. It's still not perfect. We're still working on this, trying to figure out a good slider set for realistic gameplay. But that's where we're at. I think the CPU is a little bit too easy right now. But all that being said, make sure you guys leave a like on the video, comment down below, and subscribe to the channel if you're new. And I'll see you guys in the next one. I hope you have a good one.